Hello everybody, if I look a little bit disheveled, it's because I am, because it's almost 1 a.m. But we have MMO news that I really want to talk about. Some really interesting stuff going on with indie MMOs, an RPG, and one that's not like any of those things. It's spring here in the Northern Hemisphere, generally a time for rebirth, the thawing of seasonal depression, the questioning of all of your monetary decisions over the holiday season. And that's actually a good theme for this video, this little video newsletter on MMO news, because a lot of the MMOs in this are about rebirth, which is interesting following the rebirth of Defiance being relaunched in our last news video. But there are two indie MMOs that are actually looking at their own rebirth, a solo dev RPG that is asking if you'd like to play a simulated MMO world, and we actually got the tiniest bit of news on the long dormant Unreal Engine 5 action MMO Chrono Odyssey that is about as different as possible from the other MMOs in this news drop. An MMO that might still be launching at the end of this year. But first, let's start with our old favorite, the long-suffering Embers Adrift, the classically inspired mmorpg that fell on hard times last year when they got shafted by their payment processor, going months upon months without revenue, including several of those months that had been paid. It was a disastrous situation for any MMO, but especially an indie MMO. The game has been free to play in the interim, choosing to support their players and keep the lights on even as they work to migrate over to Steam. Well, it sounds like that migration is almost complete. 9 months since getting f***ed over by their payment processor, Stormhaven Studios is planning on a soft launch on Steam at the end of April, with a big content patch at the end of May to coincide with the big promotion of Embers Adrift Rekindled. Now, of course, it should be noted, as with all things in indie game dev, the dates are what they're planning on. Things can and do often go wrong. But in part of their announcement, they went over a lot of the iterations they've been making to the game in efforts to improve the player experience, including more character slots and storage, an auction house, locked chests with rare loot, group member summons to dungeons, reduced experience required to level based on player feedback that has been receiving positive responses from the player base, new raid bosses and loot throughout the game, a compass and /follow command, as well as a crafting system revamp. Keep in mind, you can still play Embers Adrift right now, and you don't actually have to wait for the Steam launch. I've linked their website down below if you want to check a game out for yourself. It is a very classically inspired game that thrives best on grouping together and working together as a team. So if you want to just see what they've been up to, go ahead and check it out. Another indie MMO that's honestly probably seen a little bit even less success than Embers Adrift is Fractured Online. And they've had a turbulent go of it as well, but they're also looking at a rebirth of sorts, perhaps even a more extensive one. The tormented dev cycle for Fractured Online saw them break from their publisher and go indie, only to now be purchased by a new studio by a self-described superfan. Unlike Embers Adrift, this rebirth is more about the future, not necessarily imminent changes. Happy Cauldron Games, the indie studio seeking to revive Fractured Online, recently had a live stream where they talked up the game's future, and from the sound of it, it looks like they're aiming at one of the greatest rebirth stories of all time, Final Fantasy XIV, as their go-to. In instituting changes, they've said there will be a time when the current instance of Fractured Online won't be available. For Final Fantasy XIV, it went offline for just about a year before coming back in the current state that became the second largest and at times the largest MMO ever. Now, hoping for that for Fractured Online is a fool's errand. So no, this is not going to be a Final Fantasy XIV. This isn't Square Enix, but that's kind of the model that they're looking at least, because they want to do some significant revamps to the game, especially with combat. They want to make it a little bit more action-oriented, including WASD movement instead of point and click, and reducing spells and abilities to zero in on character and class identity, looking at a quality over quantity approach with them, feeling they kind of had too much. This also sounds like the place where there's the most room for change, as it's still in the prototype stages and they're willing to listen and make adjustments based on player input, even if the dev team doesn't necessarily agree with them. No word yet on monetization, but devs confirmed no pay to win or pay to progress bullshit crypto crap. So far we're avoiding the Legends of Aria travesty at least. If you're unfamiliar with Legends of Aria, it's the game that was trying to be an Ultima Online clone. They tried to launch, they did a Kickstarter and everything like that. Then they went and sold themselves to a crypto company, tried to make themselves into a crypto game, failed, tried to launch as a classic version of itself, and also failed. The short of it with the Fracture Online is there's a lot of stuff going on the back end to rebuild this game. Move it to Unity 6, change combat, and reassess pain points in the game, like removing the hunger and energy system to reduce grinding but encourage exploration. But it also sounds like a lot of this is a long ways off, with tons of back-end work still to go. So something to kind of just keep in the back of your mind as the potential in the future while we await a Fractured Online Reborn. It's definitely one I'll be keeping an eye on. The combat is one of the things that has me the most intrigued. While I'm still hungry for an Ultima Online style MMO, which Fractured Online originally kind of felt like, them going toward a action WASD combat has me thinking of Path of Exile 2 and other ARPGs, so it'll be very interesting to see where they end up and how the game plays in the future. And I guess for my Ultima Online fix, I'll just keep going back to Ultima Online. Now, our next bit of news is not necessarily MMO news, it's MMO adjacent, it's RPG news. It's about a game called Erenshor. I wanted to talk about this indie dev project from a huge fan of EverQuest, and a game that I actually covered all the way back in 2023, an indie dev solo dev project by Burgie Media. They are releasing their RPG on Monday, April 14th into early access on Steam. The game simulates the experience of playing a classic MMO in a totally solo RPG. It's a very interesting concept and one of those games that I can very easily see becoming a grindy comfort games for players. Kind of like a little bit like a classic MMO version of a Stardew Valley. Especially since it can be played on Steam Deck. This won't ever replace an MMO, but it acts in a lot of ways like the type of XCOM style or companion RPG, but with all the trappings and nostalgia of playing an old school MMO. And a lot of the game, there's a lot of feeling of comparisons to EverQuest. Even when I went into a creepy ass forest, I felt like I was going into Kithakor, for example. I got to play the early access version of the game live on stream on Friday for about 2 hours and had a blast playing it, complete with attacking guards. They do have test dummies. Oh! You can attack the guards. I hit him for 28 damage though, okay? They may have hit me back for 673 and 722, but I think it was an even fight. And giving in to my worst impulses and sending my party of NPCs who I'd been grouping with for 2 hours to also attack the guards. I'm terrible, I'm sorry. Wait, could I order my group to attack the guard? What have I done? It's an intriguing concept that's deceptively addicting for fans of MMOs. It'll never hit the same notes, obviously, as a social MMO, but it's a fun diversion. The demo is currently playable right now if you want to check it out, and the game will be releasing into early access with over 100 hours of content on April 14th and selling for $20. But now that we've talked about all these indie MMOs and indie projects, let's talk about one where my biggest concern is monetization. Chrono Odyssey, a game that mmorpg.com called potentially the biggest disappointment in MMORPGs, or one of its greatest successes. Chrono Odyssey is an MMO we know very little about at this point, even though it's potentially launching this year. We've seen some very flashy trailers. We know it'll have a slowing mechanic, a time reversal mechanic, and that it'll have a big story attached to it, and that it will be an action RPG MMORPG, an open world MMORPG. There's also some hesitation around it as a game, as it's being developed by NPixel and being published by Kakao Games. Monetization springs to mind as potentially being a huge concern for this game, so something just to keep in the back of your mind as you consider it. Kakao's Q3 2024 earnings call revealed that Chrono Odyssey has a tentative release date for Q4 2025, and we got our first update at the start of April from Chrono Odyssey's Twitter, which talked about some of the things they've been up to. First, and perhaps most importantly, they're actually testing the game. They did a focus group test back in February. So not quite what we'd like to see or hope to see, with like more of like a closed beta testing or something like that as we get closer to that release date. But maybe I'm hoping like maybe summer, if that's where they're aiming for, that Q4 release date of like closed beta testing. In that brief little update, they gave us some stats that give us the briefest shred of insight into the game. The average playtime was 11 hours, with most popular content being bounty hunting, narrowly above something called field bosses. The enemy types they show on the graphics look pretty damn cool, especially the Flayer and the Deprived, which have a very dark and creepy aesthetic to them. Looking for any scraps of info on the game, on April 7th, they posted a frustratingly vague behind-the-shoulder view of what looks like a boss fight. It looks like a clearly action combat, and the tester is using a controller to play, which isn't exactly shocking given that the game will be launching simultaneously on PC and on consoles. We get to see them getting CC'd by the spider, and down in the bottom left corner, taking a look at their health compared to the boss, it's not looking great for the player winning this battle. It even looks like the spider runs off after rooting the player. Other than that, it looks pretty straightforward, like a quest log in the right corner and just moving around and doing action combat. We don't have the same kind of things you would expect of like a tab target game with a whole action bar. So far, everything looks like a beautiful dark setting action MMORPG with potential for soul-sucking monetization, which remains a distinct possibility. And with the most recent reports out that PC players in general spend more money on microtransactions than actual games for the first time, well, caution, lots of caution is needed, because we've lost this battle on monetization, I think. But at the very least, with Chrono Odyssey, it's nice to hear some kind of news, even if it still feels a little slim and they had to just, here's this little tiny sneak peek of the gameplay. But at least we've seen something. Hopefully we get a gameplay trailer soon and more information on things like monetization, more information on an actual release date, not just financial things, so that we can actually figure out if we will have this MMO in 2025. My name is Red Bear Flynn. Thank you so much for sticking around for this news. I really appreciate it, and I hope you have a wonderful rest of your day.